Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name's Scyushi, recently a huge fan of Helldivers 2. Now this video is a little bit late considering the fact that this game is, I don't know, it's pretty old now. But I thought that it was important for me to make kind of a beginner's guide because I've been noticing a lot of other people that have been coming to the game more recently. And there's a lot of things that this game doesn't really tell you. And I wanted to kind of run you through all of this stuff that I came across and that I ended up learning from the community and so on and so forth as I ended up getting into the game. So before we hop into a mission, first, I think we have to click on acquisitions. So acquisitions are essentially the battle passes of the game. And these are steadily going to, they're just continually adding more and more battle passes. They're around all the time. They don't go away. They're basically copying Halo Infinite, where once you own a battle pass, you own it forever. So at the very least, there's no FOMO garbage related to it. By owning the game, you'll get this basic Warbond or battle pass. And then by earning medals through weeklies, dailies, or found randomly within missions, you can then end up buying up different things that are available within the battle pass, including weapons, which can completely change the way that you play the game, and armor. And a lot of the armor will end up having various passive benefits, but generally speaking isn't super crazy important because you'll end up having a lot of different types of armor that'll all have different passives, save for a few that are very, very specific within each of the different passes. There's also going to end up being the Superstore, and this is essentially going to end up being a daily rotation that will also end up having armor. The helmets don't matter, that's just cosmetic. But super credits are the big topic that I want to talk about because you can earn super credits for free. And frankly speaking, I don't really think that there's any reason to ever spend money on super credits if you're going for Warbonds or battle passes, because super credits are most of all reserved for the Superstore, in my opinion. The reason being is even if you could end up buying all of the battle passes right now at day one, you're kind of setting yourself up for failure because of the limited amount of medals that you're going to earn that you have to then spend on any and all of these passes. The medals are this little skull yellow icon in the top right, which again is mostly time gated. You can still grind it indefinitely, but you're gonna be very hard pressed to get it off of missions and stuff, which we'll talk about momentarily. I would say that before you end up actually buying any of these, you really wanna look into the actual Warbond and try to figure out what weapons and what armor and what accessories are going to end up being available. I'm not here to tell you what's the right way of playing the game because frankly speaking, the right way of playing the game is just pick whatever the heck you want. You will end up earning, I think, 300 super credits back for every Warbond that you end up purchasing. But okay, that's all the cash shop stuff. Let's talk about ship management. Stratagems are going to be the bread and butter of the progression system. So this is going to end up requiring the R tokens. I forget what they're called. You can find these on missions. You can earn them for various rewards. But the big thing is that you're going to have to level up in order to have these purchasable. If there's one thing that I would kind of complain about, it's that the description of these various stratagems is not ideal. So you kind of have to really experiment and try out weapons from other players if they end up ever leaving it for you. Because frankly speaking, some of these are, it's not that none of them are useless. They're all useful in their own right. It's just that some of them are more useful than others for specific situations that you as a new player might not know. Because for example, this autocannon says it has a support backpack required for reloading. And the video itself shows that you've got a second guy reloading. Now, the second guy reloading it makes it reload way faster, but you can still use this gun all by yourself so long as you have the backpack. But my point being is that there's all these different rocket launchers, but a lot of them have very specific functions against very specific enemy types. And generally speaking, the rule of thumb is to just kind of pick what you think is cool and never mind what people say is the meta. But those are kind of your power weapons that you can summon. There's also going to end up being orbital cannons, which have very specific functions of massive suppressing fire, most of all. The Eagle airstrike and what have you, these are basically on a short cooldown, but again, they do a huge cluster of damage in one specific area. Stuff like the jump pack, very useful. Buddy of mine told me you can use this in combination with a flamethrower, which I think is awesome. I haven't tried it yet because I'm saving this currency, because the biggest problem that I have with this game is that a lot of these items that you unlock aren't spaced out in a way that makes sense to me. Like, here's the new fast recon vehicle. It's at level 25. Here's the gigantic mech exosuit, also level 25. And the second exosuit, also level 25. Like, I would have been fine if it was a level 25, 26, 27. Point being, I find it so strange that so much of the game will usually have these very select levels that just dump you with a whole bunch of stratagems, which in turn makes you really have to be careful with the amount of points that you have, because you got to kind of prepare long term, which is very annoying in my eyes. Now, moving on to the ship module, this is basically passives. And these will end up getting perpetually better and better and better passives the further along you go into the tree. But you'll note the amount of the amount of these currencies that you need. So the first tier is usually going to end up being the green currency, then it goes to orange, and then it goes to purple or pink or whatever. These are some of the hardest items to grind in the game because you only really get a handful of them when you're on a mission. And if you end up dying, you'll drop all of them, but somebody else can grab them. So long as at least one person extracts with these samples in their inventory, everyone in the party is going to get them. But I've heard some horrible stories of people that are almost level 100 in this game, and they still weren't able to max out any of these ship modules. So again, dig deep, figure out where do you want to go in terms of how you want to build your character into your playstyle, because the passive abilities that you get out of these are going to end up being really, really helpful, but you got to be very, very careful because the sheer grind that it is to get a lot of these currencies. Okay, now we can move a little bit further in the ship. So this is going to be the Armory, where you'll choose your primary weapon, and the description of these is pretty good, but generally speaking, you're going to have to just kind of experiment with them and try to figure out what works. My point being is you'll get your hands on a couple different snipers. There's going to end up being a submachine gun, which is a one-handed gun as your primary. The reason for this is because one of the stratagems can end up being like a shield. So this way you have to take it with a one-handed gun. Or some missions will have you grab an item like an SSD, and then you are forced to either use your pistol or a one-handed gun. It really depends on, again, do you want to be a speedy boy? Is that the objective that you're going for? So you can equip yourself for this given situation. And energy-based weapons technically have infinite ammo, which will be something important we'll touch upon when we hop into a match. They have infinite ammo so long as they don't overheat. Basically, if the gun overheats, you have to dump the mag and insert a new one in. So if you're careful, you can actually just have infinite ammo. You wouldn't think that the combat gets as intense as it does, but this game has a lot of little immersion things to it, which we'll get into. Namely, you will dump the entire mag rather than just reloading what's left in your ammo count. So you usually will try to shoot a gun up into its maximum, until the whole clip is out. Or at the very least, you're going to be reloading very often, which means you're going to be ammo hungry. But in a lot of cases, it can be more beneficial to just swap to your secondary to finish off an enemy that's in your face rather than take the extra time to reload, because sometimes you just don't have that time. And your throwables, once again, are going to differ. This is kind of your standard frag that's going to be good for a larger group of enemies. High explosive is for stronger enemies, heavy penetration, so on and so forth. But moving on from weaponry, there's going to be all the armor. And again, the armor type is all that matters. You're going to see a base stat value on each of the armors as well as their passive. So in this case, I like using the light armor because you're very fast. But I also like the fact that enemies don't spot you very well. Like, you wouldn't think it makes a difference, but it really, really does. Especially with your stamina when you're using the heavier armor. However, it does mean that you are going to lose a lot of armor rating and a lot of defense. So you kind of gotta just, again, it's not that one is better than the other. They're all subjective and they're all different. Just pick what you want. Helmet, again, cosmetic. Cape, also cosmetic. There's also a character tab where you can choose your character's body type, voice pack. You can also slot up to 4 different emotes. The only reason I'm pointing this out is a buddy of mine the other day came in and said, wait, you can slot in 4 different emotes? Because I guess back in the day you can only do 1. Boosters are going to be very important. These are going to end up being a passive that will affect everyone in the group. So some of them are really good, some of them not so good. Now, when you're actually hosting a match, you're gonna come over to the Galactic Warmap, and first you're going to see this menu. And this is where you'll choose one of the 3 different factions. Basically just choose whichever you want to fight. Yellow is bugs, red is robots, which I would not recommend early on. And then the purple is the new boys, which is the illuminated, I think. Basically, this is your zombie horde / stealthy boys. Like, they basically have these flying cameras scouting around, and if you can avoid them or kill them in time, you can end up sneaking around pretty undetected. Then there's gonna be the bugs, the Tyranids. This is just Starship Troopers. The bugs have huge amounts of numbers, and they're also very tanky and just kind of pop out of nowhere. They are very susceptible to fire. And then there's the robots, which is just an infinite generated, like basically if a 3D printer was operated by Skynet. These guys are deadly fast. There's a lot of them. You can kill them pretty quickly, but there's a lot of them. You'll also note the difficulty at the bottom middle of the screen. So this is kind of the most important aspect of the game that I think sold me on this game, like amongst the many other things. Because the difficulty scaling in this game quite literally will not increase the value of health points or damage. The higher difficulties means more enemies, more reinforcements, more enemy types, more objectives, more. It basically makes the game harder by having you, the player, have to manage a lot more. As far as gameplay is concerned, you can see the samples at the bottom middle of the screen. Trivial has the green, going up to difficulty 4 or challenging. We suddenly introduce the orange ones on top of the green, and extreme finally introduces the purple ones. So this basically means that you can find all of the samples throughout the map at just random little spots and so on and so forth. But anyway, let me go into the Illuminate here. We'll select a planet, which the planet is actually very important, which is really cool too, because you can see right up there, this is going to end up being a forest planet. And then we can check the environmental effects. So we've got rainstorms, which reduce visibility. Now, this mission right here, you can see there's a couple people already on, but I'm gonna end up going to my own singular mission alone in a minute, because I just want to show for completing this mission, we'll end up gaining a single medal. Again, this is the currency spent on the battle pass. But if we swap to a higher difficulty, different missions show up, including different objectives. And we're also going to end up getting 2 medals instead. Higher difficulty now will reward us with even more medals, but so long as we complete these 2 missions in a row. Higher difficulties, further than that, are going to just continue doing that and adding on more missions. So you're rewarded for playing the game for longer. You can always end up leaving and coming back later, but one thing to keep in mind is that if you, like me, like the sense of variety that this game has, then it kind of becomes a little problematic the further you get into the game, because you're tasked with doing a lot of missions on the same level over and over. Anyway, let's get to the Hell Pod. So from this Hell Pod, you can see that we got a 40-minute timer to complete this objective. We also get to choose where we land, which you kind of got to hover around and you'll see where the danger is, where a bunch of enemy spawns are and whatever. So let's select this slot right here. So you can see in the top left, this is really handy. It shows you are basically fighting against the Illuminate. It says Super Earth Control because the Illuminate are basically the first creatures in this game that are invading a planet rather than us trying to take the planet back. From this menu, you can always change your body armor and your equipment and guns and stuff with your loadout, but more importantly, there's also going to end up being your stratagems, and there's all sorts of stratagems as we covered. So for this being Illuminate, I'm gonna choose some very specific stuff here. After you selected all your stratagems, don't forget to select the booster if you have one. Now we're finally in the game and we get to actually see the mobility of the character. So you can crouch, you can hold crouch to end up going prone. You can double tap at any time to end up dashing or jumping in the direction that you're running, which is a really good way of going prone, avoiding damage and avoiding enemies that might be in your face. You can shoot while you're jumping, so you can jump backwards and shoot, or you could end up running up to an enemy sight line and just dash behind them and do something like that. Lots of cool little tricks. If you hold the reload button, this is something that I completely stumbled across. Nobody told me about this. You can change the scope of your gun depending if it supports it. You can also change your gun to semi-automatic, burst, whatever. You can turn your flashlight to auto or just on at all times, which can be really good for low visibility. I'm gonna leave it off for right now though. While you're aiming with left trigger, the little laser is most of all for your teammates because there's always going to end up being friendly fire in this game. So just be very careful, watch your sight lines. Sometimes it just happens though, but you can push in the right joystick. I don't know what it is on keyboard, sorry, to go into a scope here. Now, something that I really want to point out here that I think is important is in your options, your display options, you can actually change your vertical field of view. But if we crank this up all the way, you're gonna notice something. We get a little bit more verticality. Most of all, it's kind of like a fish bubble that gives us a lot more to our camera. But now when we zoom in, suddenly the gun is actually a little bit further away from our character. You can't always hip fire, which, you know, go for it. But then if you're aiming down the sight, you're gonna see we've got a little dot in the middle of our screen. But then there's this little circle that's slowly wavering around. That's where our gun is actually aiming. So you'll see if I do this, you can see that my character is trailing behind my cursor and has to line up. The reason for this is some of the heavier weapons in the game might take a little while to line up properly. But okay, now that we've dealt with the movement and, you know, all the stuff to do with our character, let's open up our stratagems, which is in the top left. So the reinforce, when I'm playing alone, again, I would just die and I would respawn. If you're playing with other people, there will be a button combination up there to throw down a reinforce, which will then revive anyone who's dead. You can't throw it down unless they're already dead. The SOS beacon is literally you opening up your game to the help of others. So right now I have it on a private game. I'm pretty sure that would just open me up to the public and also make my mission more priority so people would join me. Then there's the resupply, which is on a cooldown, but I'll throw it down right here. You basically just punch in the combo, throw it down. It's got a little time limit and you want to be careful because you can get squished by these. But the blue ones are always going to end up being your support functions, like your weapons, your accessibility, you know, your accessory stratagems, right? So the little clip in the bottom left, that is the representative icon of how much ammo we have left in the chamber. So if I start shooting it, you'll see it start moving. And then we currently have 7 out of 7 full mags in reserve. So if I reload, he's gonna swap it out, put a new one in, and cock it. Now we've got 6 out of 7. But the cool thing is all these nice little details, if I end up shooting a little bit, but I don't go down to 0 and I reload, he's gonna just swap the mag because he doesn't have to cock it because there's already a bullet in the chamber. And again, like all these little things like that are where you have to be very cautious with like how you end up, you know, which guns you end up using. It all ends up changing very slightly. And the environment will actually affect things like that. In the rain, things won't stay on fire as long. If you're on a planet that is really, really hot, like a desert or something, energy weapons will heat up faster. But if you're on a cold planet, like a winter planet, they'll take longer to heat up and you'll be able to sprint for longer. Whereas, you know, on a hot planet, you won't be able to sprint very long. Anyways, if we pull up our little compass in the bottom right here, I can use the D-pad to navigate around. It'll probably show the buttons on mouse and keyboard. I don't know what they are, but again, because of the armor that I've chosen, I can mark this spot and it'll start pinging. So I can see that there's an enemy ship there, and this is the main objective that I want to go for. So this would end up being a way that you can communicate to your teammates if you're not using the mic chat or anything. This is where I want to go, or this is where I'm going. Oh, pardon me. It's also important to point out that the Warthog, or the vehicle that was added into the game, which you'll only have if you're level 25, on controller, if you have your map open and you press the X button, that'll end up swapping your seat as well as marking your map, which is kind of weird. Oh, and be careful of water because you can drown. So this is important. I discovered a minor point of interest. So if we zoom the map in, you'll see this little diamond, right? This is a location where you can find weapons, you can find, super credits, basically all of the currencies that I talked about in the ship, you can find randomly at these little locations. And if you ever end up finding a radar tower on the map, then that will mark all of the different locations on the map, so it can be really helpful in that regard. You'll see right here, we've got a free machine gun, we got some grenades we could use, we got some ammo. And I'm not gonna go into too much detail with a lot of these like mission variety and such, because you're generally speaking just going to end up learning this all along the way. Like for these ships, for example, if I shoot at it enough, I can burst its shield, and then I could end up, you know, throwing down an Eagle airstrike. And so long as I actually aimed that correctly, it should end up exploding. Okay, I didn't aim that correctly. But yeah, that would stop an enemy spawn point. There's lots of little things like that you can do. One thing that I did think was important enough to mention just before we call it for today's video, because we, frankly speaking, kind of covered everything, or at least the basics. But this mission right here, where we have to raise the flag, it's basically going to be a contextual like objective, where as we come up to it, you'll see the stratagem sparking up. And then you just put in the combo, and usually it'll throw it in a specific location. Unless it's a hell bomb, then you gotta throw it down, get it ready to explode the enemy base. But this is going to end up having a flag start raising while it alerts enemies in the area, just because it's, you know, blaring speakers for patriotism. And I just thought that this was so cool. Saluting it makes it raise faster. And there's all sorts of little things like that in this game. One thing that I do find a little bit annoying is sometimes it'll be like, hey, collect the SSD, and you don't know where it is. Usually if you go to a computer and you're at a specific spot, and then the next chain in the quest line is telling you get the SSD, then you know it's in that location somewhere. Unless it's an item that you've already picked up, and then it'll say, bring this to the communications relay, and then you'll check your map and you'll see, oh, you gotta take it all the way across the map. But with all of that said, I would very much appreciate if you would like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, all of that stuff. I'll still have some other videos that'll cover Helldivers here and there. Probably not an hour tutorial, more likely a review, and then just me randomly streaming it, and maybe even having some highlight videos every now and then of some good matches.